Hello everyone, I'm Pastor Chris and welcome to Estero Church. We're here because we want to prepare and equip you for the growth that God has prepared in advance for you. Now there are some things in life that are basically guaranteed, right? You have life, death, and of course the one thing we're all thinking about right now, taxes. We all know those ones, but one guarantee that isn't talked about a lot is struggling with spiritual growth. That's right, we all deal with this in some way. The trick here is that often when we are struggling so much with our spiritual life, it's because we aren't letting God be a part of it. I know that sounds ridiculous, but think about it. We struggle with spiritual growth because we want to try to do it all ourselves. Spiritual growth should be a relationship, but we don't treat it that way. We like to control it because we know when we let God in on our spiritual growth, it can be painful. And if you're thinking that, you're right. Remember though, that pain isn't always bad. Physical pain is our body sending us a signal that one part of our body needs our attention. Spiritual growing pains function in the same way. God will use those growing pains to draw your attention to the places that need your attention. Pain points to process. Today we're going to talk about how God will prune parts of our life ultimately to grow not just us spiritually, but others around us as well. The key to all of this is trusting in God. We have to trust that He has our best interest in mind, even in the pruning process. Do you trust Him? Part of this growth series is, of course, that we're getting closer and closer to Holy Week. Next week, actually, is Palm Sunday, believe it or not, and we have a lot going on this week. Take a look at this video for times and updates for Holy Week. Hi there, I'm Pastor Chris, and I want to personally invite you to join us for Easter at Estero Church as we look at Jesus' victory over death and what that means for us in 2022. Now look, if it's been a while since you've been to church, or maybe you didn't grow up in church, or maybe you're like me and you've been burned by the church before, whatever your background is with church, we want you to know that there's a place for you here at Estero Church. There's a place for your family here at Estero Church.
One of the best ways to prepare yourself for Easter is to experience the Stations of the Cross. Our outdoor Stations of the Cross is a self-guided experience where you will get the opportunity to follow in the final moments of Jesus' earthly ministry. As you walk around the path, you will be invited to reflect upon the events leading up to Jesus' death on the cross for our sins. This is a powerful experience, and so we invite you to come to the southern end of our property to reflect on these stations at any point from April 8th through April 17th.
So come join us this Easter at Estero Church. We're celebrating Easter here outdoors, in person at 9 a.m. and at 10:30 a.m., and also online at 9. We're celebrating Maundy Thursday at 6:30 p.m. and then Good Friday at 6:30 p.m. as well. And both of those are in person and online. We would love to celebrate with you and your family, and really there's no better time to come to church than Easter. For more information on all of these events and a lot more, head to estero.church. I'm really looking forward to worshiping with you online for Holy Week. I hope to see you there. Today we're going to spend some time in worship, and then we will engage in the sermon. For worship today, I want you to think about where God might be choosing to prune you. What are some areas of your life that you feel like God is cutting off for your spiritual growth? Think about that, type it in the chat. Let's worship.
Cast my mind to Calvary, where Jesus bled and died for me. I see His wounds, His hands, His feet, my Savior on that cursed tree. Bound and drenched in tears, they laid Him down in Joseph's tomb. The entrance Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. Come flood this place and fill the atmosphere. Your glory, God, is what our hearts long for. To be overcome by your presence, There's nothing worth more that will ever come close. Nothing can compare. You're a living hope. Your presence, Lord. I've tasted and seen of the sweetest of loves, where my heart becomes free and my shame is undone. In your presence, Lord. Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. Come flood this place and fill the atmosphere. Your glory, God, is what our hearts long for. To be overcome by your presence, Lord. Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. Come flood this place and fill the atmosphere. Your glory, God, is what our hearts long for. To be overcome by your presence, Let us become more aware of your presence. Let us experience the glory of your goodness. Let us become more aware of your presence. Let us experience the glory of your goodness. Let us become more aware of your presence. Let us experience the glory of your goodness. Let us become more aware of your presence. Let us experience the glory of your goodness, Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. Come flood this place and fill the atmosphere. Your glory, God, is what our hearts long for. To be overcome by your presence, Lord.
Thank you, worship team. I asked you to think of some areas of your life that God might be pruning, and I hope some things came to mind during worship. If not, don't worry, God is going to show you those areas of your life that need it. Remember, God is the gardener, and He knows your whole process before you do. Our next place of worship today is going to be giving. And giving is our way of acknowledging who God is in our life and remembering that He is in control. You don't have to give to be a part of our church, but if you want to follow God's commands for us, then this is one of them. Like His other commands, though, it's not just for the sake of making us work hard. Giving grows us, and it realigns us with God's purpose in our life. It helps us see the whole world the way it really is. It belongs to God. If you want to give live, you can do so by clicking on the link in the chat. And if you're watching this service at a later time, you go to our website and click the link at the top of the page that says Give. With that, now let's listen to our sermon today by Pastor Tim.
Well, good morning, online church. This is Pastor Tim. Hey, I'm excited to be with you here this morning. I really hope that as we're a little past the midway point now, we're coming down the stretch of 40 days of growth. I really hope that you've engaged in this process. I really hope that you have been taking advantage of the podcasts and the devotionals, but not just as taking in information, of just being hearers, but of actually practicing. I challenged you at the beginning to try to do this as somewhat of an adventure. And so I'm hoping that you have been on this adventure of trying to work through some of this stuff. As we've been saying every week, we're talking about, the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And how are you doing with those things? Are they growing in your life? And so this series has been focused on trying to answer the question, what are the ways that God's designed so that we can grow the fruit of the Spirit? And we've tried to talk about the fact that we have responsibilities, that God does His part, He brings the growth, but we have our part, and we put ourselves in places where it's most conducive for us to grow so that Jesus can transform us on the inside. That there are habits and attitudes and things, and as you get into those things, these ways that God's ordained for you to do it, then as you get into them, then you meet God there and He begins to move in you and begins to do His work. I want to spend a little time this morning on a couple of verses from John 15, and you will recognize them, and I've referred to them a couple times, but I want to spend particularly verse 1 and 2 of John 15. John 15 starts out, this is Jesus speaking, and He says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. I'm the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. I want to take a second, and I don't want to fall too far down this rabbit hole or stretch this analogy that Jesus is using here too far. But I want to take a minute and I want to ask you, have you ever thought, what's the purpose of fruit? Why do plants produce fruit? If we're going to talk about tomato plants, which I've been talking about a lot in this series, from a tomato plant, a tomato vine's perspective, why does it grow fruit? Well, the tomato, actually the purpose of the tomato actual fruit is reproduction. A tomato is full of tomato seeds. And when the seeds become mature, the plant sends signals and the tomato begins to ripen. It gets a little more engorged, it gets a little sweeter, it gets a little softer. This ripening, this softening and sweetening of the fruit, that produces the ripeness. And that ripeness then is attractive to other birds and other animals, including humans. And we're attracted to that ripened fruit so we can eat it. So if, for example, a tomato falls to the ground under the plant, you're going to get a whole slew of little tomato plants growing there. I told you a couple weeks ago I lost all my tomatoes in a frost in the end of January, and when those tomatoes got stunned with that frost, they dropped all their fruit. I tried to clean up as much as I can, but I have little spots in my garden right now all over the place where I have wild, tomato plants coming up everywhere. But those tomatoes, if they drop straight down, they're in the same place, they're competing for the same nutrients and the same sunlight as the original plant. But let's say a deer, or as in the case of my garden, a palm rat or a bird, comes and eats a ripe tomato. Do they pick out the seeds? Nope. Seeds, by the way, have evolved or have been designed to survive the digestive process of animals, and so they're eliminated. The seeds then deposited with a little pile of manure that fertilizes it and help it get its start growing away from the original plant. I was thinking about this with apple trees, and which I grew up with, and horses. Horses love apples. Apples are ripe, a horse will come and eat a ton of ripe apples. They won't pick out the seeds. Well, what are horses good at? Well, they're good at moving, so they go somewhere else. What else are horses good at? Well, horses are good at pooping, so they poop out apple seeds all over the place. And if the the climate conditions are right for apple trees, you're going to have this spread of apple trees through ripe fruit. All of this is positively fascinating to me. And for someone to believe that all this incredible diversity and interconnectedness and natural symbiosis, which just doesn't happen with animals and seeds, but it really is on an incredible scale with everything in so many ways. We don't even recognize how interconnected that this stuff is. It's so fascinating. Recent research is teaching us that trees in forests are actually interconnected, and they communicate and they care for each other. They send nutrients to each other. They actually warn each other of impending danger. That the fungus in the ground of the forest, it's actually the internet of the forest. That's how they communicate. Life on this planet is so fine-tuned and so interconnected that to me it takes more faith to believe it's all random selection and mindless biological processes than it does to believe that it's all part of an intelligent design designed by an intelligent Creator. But back to the fruit. Fruit's purpose in the design is reproduction. And so it's possible that that ripened fruit of the Spirit in your life, that's not just for you. But the good deeds you were created to do, and the love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control you do them from, that those are to be attractive to the people around you. And that your life is to be about God using you to plant seeds of the gospel in other people. Jesus talked about that another way when he said, listen, you don't light a lamp and put it under a bushel. You light a lamp in the way that it gives light and therefore attracts other things to it. These seeds in us then can be spread as seeds of the gospel to other people. I see what you have, and I want to know why. I want to know why you act the way you do. I want to know why your priorities are the way they are. I want to know how it is that you're able to respond to circumstances in ways that feel so good and right and healthy. I want to know why. And we get to share the gospel. Again, I don't want to stretch the analogy too far, but it's certainly something to think about. Jesus said, I am the true vine. Well, what are some of the things that come from the vine? How about your identity? You're a tomato if you're connected to a tomato vine. Your purpose in the world depends on what vine you're connected to. The nutrients you need are brought to you in a way that you can metabolize them from the vine. The things you need to protect yourself from disease and infection come to you from the vine. A way to carry away the waste so that you don't get toxic and poisoned inside all happens through the vine. The vine's connected to the soil through its roots. The vine produces leaves that carry out the process of photosynthesis that converts the raw materials brought from the roots into usable material that the plant needs. And then it sends all of that along to the fruit. The vine keeps you anchored in the wind and rooted in the storm. Think about that. I'm the true vine, he says. And he says, and my Father is the gardener. He's the one growing the fruit. He's the one with the plan. He's the one who knows what it is he's trying to grow and who knows what it is that he's trying to accomplish. And you can trust him. You can trust the gardener that he knows what he's doing. Jesus goes on, he says, again, I'm the true vine, my Father's the gardener. But this next verse is a little unsettling. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. This sounds harsh, doesn't it? But branches that bear no fruit, they take away from the potential of the rest of the plant to produce healthy fruit by taking nutrients that are better used elsewhere. And I want to take a minute here to talk about sort of the layers of this analogy. There really are a couple of ways to interpret this verse, every branch that doesn't bear fruit he cuts off. You can take this individually, or you could take it collectively. Let's talk about individually for a second. If you're just thinking of myself, I can think that there might be personal parts of me that aren't bearing much fruit and that God is going to cut them off. That God is going to remove those pieces from me. And you can make that case. I think there's less evidence that that's what he means because of what the next verse says. It's my opinion, and there are smart people who disagree with me, but it's my opinion that what he's talking about is collectively. That he's talking about removing people who bear no fruit kind of from the church, from the life of the church, kind of from the body of Christ, that he cuts people. If you're not bearing fruit, he cuts you away. And I don't know that I completely understand this. And again, what does it all mean? I think you find the heart of God in all this in the parable of the barren fig tree in Luke 15. And here's that parable. Jesus told this parable. He said, a man comes into his vineyard, he looks, there's a fig tree that bears no fruit. And he goes to the head gardener and he said, look, this is the third year in a row that I've come looking for fruit on this tree and it hasn't, and it doesn't have any. Cut it down, get rid of it. We got an unproductive tree, get rid of it, throw it away. So that, why should it use up the soil? And the gardener says, and this is where you hear the heart of God. The gardener says, no. Give it some more time. let me dig around it, let me fertilize it, let it go a little longer, and then next year, see if it's going to bear fruit. Let's give it some more time. And I think that's the heart of God for us. So whether you kind of take this individually or collectively, this verse should give you significant pause. I don't think it should make you hopeless or despair. I don't think you should allow the enemy of your soul to take a minute and say, you see, you're unfruitful, you haven't done enough, and accuse you and all that stuff. But I think it should give you pause. And I think you should remember that Paul tells us in Romans that as a master gardener, God is able to graft branches in and out of the root at will. He really is. The reason, again, I think that is speaking collectively is because I think here, in this next verse, is why I think he's talking about individually. Because the next verse is, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. Every branch that bears fruit, every branch that's plugged into the vine is getting the nutrients and the life it needs, that is alive in the Spirit, that is doing the works that God created it to do, which is the fruit, that he prunes it so that it will be more fruitful. Now, this idea of pruning is really interesting, and I want to take you out to my garden. Knowing that this was coming, I allowed a couple of tomato plants to kind of grow beyond what I would normally have pruned them, so I can demonstrate this for you. Hey, so welcome to my garden. Glad to have you here. I planted this tomato plant about 6-7 weeks ago, and I haven't taken care of it knowing that this was coming. And so when we talk about pruning, I wanted to show you the reasons that we prune. You know, Jesus said, every plant that bears fruit, my Father's going to prune. So I want to show you this plant. Now, this is a Super Sweet 100, which is a cherry tomato that is indeterminate. It will grow and grow and grow. And so the first reason that we prune is to get rid of disease. And I don't know if you can see down here on the bottom of this plant, but there are all these leaves that are turning brown and that have spots on them and stuff. That's because they're in contact with the ground. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to prune off all of those leaves that have the various discoloration on them. You can see how bad that one's gotten. That will eventually spread up the whole plant. And so we want to go through and just clip off all these leaves that have been on the ground. And we want to get rid of those leaves. That one just fell off. This one will come off. This one will come off here. So one of the first and primary reasons that we prune is to get rid of things that are diseased that have the opportunity to infect the whole rest of the plant. So that's the first piece, is to prune to get rid of disease. The second piece is that you prune so that sometimes cutting away good things so that better things can grow. The thing that you may or may not know about tomatoes is that they will throw off what are called suckers. And the thing to find on this tomato, and I'm actually kneeling on it here, is what's the main stem? What's the main stem that we're actually trying to save? Well, it's hard to tell from this what the main stem is, because it looks like there's just a lot. So you follow up the tomato from here, and you begin to look, okay, what's the highest point where there are flowers and well-developed seed or well-developed fruit? Well, the fruit comes up this way, right? That means that this stem right here is actually a sucker. It's not part of the main stem. And I know with tomatoes that you want to take off any suckers below the first fruit. Now, because I'm putting this on a trellis, because I'm going to put it up here, I'm going to let these suckers grow once I get, and they'll fill in the trellis. Literally, this trellis will be completely covered with tomato branches. But for right now, I need to cut this off. This is the sucker. Now, that's a perfectly good part of the tomato that would grow, and you can see there's already flowers on that. That would grow and produce more tomatoes. The problem is it's not going to grow in an area or in a way that works. This actually has little bitty tomatoes and actually has other suckers that are starting to grow on it. But it's below the main stem or the first thing of fruit, so I need to cut that off. And that whole piece needs to go away. And then this one right here also is a sucker. You can see it also has flowers, but it's also below that first fruit, so that needs to go away. Look at the difference in the plant from when I started. That plant was just growing kind of wild and just going kind of crazy. Now it looks much more like the tomato that you would be used to, right? What is this one? Well, that's also a sucker, but that's above the first fruit. So we can let that one go. So then what we need to do is we need to begin to weave this up into this trellis. And because it hasn't grown that way, I need some extra help holding the weight. So I have a little clip, and this I would consider be part of pruning. And that clip is going to help hold the weight of the plant. I'm going to put a second clip here. And that way, that's held up. Okay, now what about this? Well, that sucker is okay in that it's growing the right way, and I can kind of move it over there. But now you can see, okay, so I've got my fruit here, but I can see that I have some more leaves over here that have disease on them. So I'm going to clip those off. This one is diseased, that comes off, and I'll take that off. Now, this plant is now ready to keep growing, and all of the energy that was coming out here and here and here and everywhere else is now just going to go up into here so that this plant is able to grow up and be healthy up top. So I pruned to get rid of disease. I've also pruned I've taken off healthy things so that the rest can be healthier. And I've also pruned by adding clips so that it will grow the way that I want it to grow. So that's how you prune. God does the same thing with us. The same principles, cuts off disease, removes healthy things, and pushes us to grow in certain ways. So here's an important question. What might God be wanting to prune from you? What might God be wanting to prune from you? And I want to go back here because this analogy of God being the gardener and pruning and us thinking about this breaks down a little bit. At this point, the tomato plant that I just pruned that you just saw, I didn't ask that tomato plant's permission to prune it. I just pruned it. I didn't require that tomato to cooperate with me. God requires our cooperation. He will not prune you if you refuse to be pruned. He just won't do it. So again, it's a good analogy, but I want to make sure that you understand that. God won't prune you if you refuse to be pruned. So are there diseased parts of your life that you need to get rid of? Are you holding on to them? Maybe a situation you're close to that continues to bring you into temptation, or through which bad things come in. Maybe it's a relationship that's not good for you. Maybe it's a habit that's gotten out of control. There are all kinds of possibilities of things. Maybe it's the way that you've organized your schedule. Maybe it's some attitudes that you've adopted. Maybe it's some lies that you've believed. Are there diseased parts of you that God is trying to clip out? Maybe he's asking you, hey, you need to change this relationship. Maybe he's saying, hey, you need to get some help with this habit that's gotten out of control. Hey, you need to find the truth and get rid of the lie that you've believed. Now, we get that. We get that. As I said when I was pruning, listen, the leaves that are closest to the ground, you have to cut those off because a lot of tomato disease come up through the ground. So you have to clip them off, even if they're not quite diseased. But what good things might you have going on that God might want to clip off so that your energy can be focused on better things? For example, there's nothing wrong with volunteering. But maybe God's asking you to give up 2 of the 3 places you're serving so that you can really focus your energy on one and do it really well. There's nothing wrong with loving sports and staying up with your favorite team. Maybe God's asking you to spend a little less time online reading about them and take a little more time in the Word. Maybe God's asking you to give up some of the things that you do that you're good at or that you're okay at so that you can do things that you're gifted in and passionate about. There might be things that in themselves are perfectly fine. But God's maybe asking you to give some of those up. For me, one of the things that God asked me to give up, and I periodically wrestle with him on this, is a bedtime. It's going to bed on time so I get enough sleep. Is there anything wrong with staying up till 11 o'clock? No, it's not a law. There's no law that says I should go to bed at 10. There's nothing wrong with it. But maybe God's asking me and saying, hey, I want you to take that time. I want to cut off this thing so that you can grow better things. And what direction might God be trying to grow you in? Are you willing to grow that way? Are there opportunities that God's presenting you to branch out? Are there things that you're hearing about or seeing or needs that you're sensing in the world and you're like, man, I could or I should do something about that? Are there places where your heart yearns to make a difference? What opportunities is God maybe pushing you to grow in a different way? Or in what ways have you grown in the past and God's saying, listen, I've given you all this experience, all this stuff. I want you to use that. I want to use that for my glory. Get involved here, get involved there. Grow this way. I know for some of you, honestly, this 40 days of growth, doing these devotionals, engaging in these disciplines, God has been training you and trying to grow you in some of these ways, to lean into some of that stuff. That's wonderful. Keep that kind of stuff up. What direction is God trying to grow you in? And again, I want to say that for a plant, I imagine that pruning is no fun. From the plant's perspective, you don't always realize what the pruning's about. And you have to admit that the pruning, the things that get cut off, they leave a wound that needs to be healed. It can't be fun for the plant. And pruning isn't fun for us. But the plants survive. And if it's pruned right, they will thrive even better than before. And so there is this thing where we have to trust the gardener that he knows what he's doing. And that as you submit yourself to pruning, and again, this is where the analogy breaks down, because our relationship with God is always a relationship of cooperation. We have to give God permission to prune us. But when we do, you can trust that you're being shaped in exactly the way that you need to be shaped. And that's the thing. We learn to trust. Our faith builds and grows. It builds and grows, and we learn to trust, and we give ourselves up to pruning. We give ourselves up. Here, God, Master Gardener, do your work in me. If there are things that need cut off in me, cut them off. If there are good things, Lord, that need to be clipped back or eliminated so that great things can grow, God, I release them to you. God, if I need to be trained to grow in this way or that way, if I need to be put on the trellis, if I need to be trimmed or pruned in a way so that I can fit onto that structure, whatever way you want me to grow, I'm willing to grow. I'm going to trust that you know what you're doing, and that the circumstances you bring into my life are going to be circumstances that are for my benefit. So Lord, I'm yours. Do with me what you will. Is that your heart? Is that your attitude? I hope it is, and if it's not, it's okay. Listen, it's okay to be where you are. But talk about God with it. Talk to him about it. Let him know right where you are. Start asking yourself, why aren't I there? What's holding me back? What is it in me that I'm struggling with and wrestling with? And maybe in that process, God will prune you. And so give yourself to the Master Gardener. He's the vine. You're the branch. You stay connected to him, you're going to be fine. Trust me. Let's pray. God, just so grateful that we don't have to be our own vine, that we don't have to know how to prune ourselves. Just so grateful that you nourish us, that you feed us, you give us exactly what we need, that you protect us, that you help us to regulate ourselves, that you anchor us, and that you prune us. Even though pruning's no fun, Lord, thank you that you love us enough, that you want us to be the best that we can be and to produce the best fruit. Use that fruit, Lord, to plant the seeds of your love and your gospel to the world around us. May others find the fruit that you grow in us to be attractive enough that they want to come, and may we be able to plant seeds in them. Through your work, may those seeds be transplanted to them. May your life and love grow in them as well. We surrender to you, Lord. We trust you. We give you permission, as much as we know how, to do your work in us. Do it now. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, so really hope that, again, this series, this process has been helpful to you. I really honestly believe that God longs to meet with you, longs to grow you, longs to have you come and climb up in his lap, to know his love, and to know peace. Have a great week.
Thank you for the message, Pastor Tim. For me personally, there were a couple things that came to mind that God has pruned in my life. I'm the type of person that loves to dive into new activities head first and try new things, but the truth is that sometimes my own desires for my life can get in the way of God's plans for me. This isn't always the case, but the important thing is that we make sure that our relationship with God is just that, a relationship. Keep God in the conversation and remember, it's a process. It's okay if it's hard. Thanks for being with us today. If I can be praying for you about anything, please share it with me live or email me at ctimpson@estero.church. Now receive the benediction. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. Have a great week.